Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of Fight in Focus. We have a loaded fight card coming at you February 5th. Two different fight cards. We have Claressa the Quote Shields fighting Ema Kozin over in the UK. That's during the day, and then in the evening, a PBC matchup we can't miss. Mario Barrios is fighting Keith one-time Thurman. And today's panel, Hall of Fame panel, the Schmo might add. It's a loaded panel today. We cannot wait to break down these matchups, talk about everything going on in the fights. Let's start off with Andreas Hale. He's the senior editor of Combat Sports for Sporting News and the host of the Corner podcast. Andreas, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, it's good to be back, and it's good to be talking boxing.
And then we also are joined by Dan Rafael, the award-winning boxing writer, a.k.a. the boxing guy. Yeah, we see you, Conor McGregor. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Schmo. Looking forward to having conversation on two cards today, not just one.
Oh, that's right, Dan. It's loaded. We got two cards. And last but not least, we have Curran Bhatia, on-air reporter for Ring City US and NBC Sports, and Matchroom Boxing host. Curran, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Mo. Dan, Andreas, excited to talk some boxing, and let's get into it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's start with the fight that's going to be taking place earlier on the day, February 5th. We have Claressa the Quote Shields. She's 11-0. She's facing Ema Kozin, the Princess, 21-0. As you guys know, someone's always got to go. 10 rounds, all the belts, WBC, WBA, IBF, women's middleweight titles on the line from Motor Point Arena in Wales. Dan, let's start with you. What are you most looking forward to seeing out of this intriguing matchup between these two?
Well, really, besides just the actual fight, I enjoy watching Claressa box. The main thing, though, is so much at stake for her if she wins. So she's got to get through the fight in good style, because as important as this fight is because of the titles that are on the line, the reality is what's more important and more significant is the next fight, which is going to be the big rematch between her and her amateur rival, Savannah Marshall, who was the only woman to ever lay a defeat on Claressa Shields. She was undefeated as an amateur except for the one loss that she suffered against Marshall, and she's undefeated as a professional, and they've been going back and forth. They're with the same promoter over in the UK, Boxer, and this is the match that is meant to, hopefully for Claressa's sake, set up that big-time match for the undisputed title, but she's got to get through an undefeated boxer in Kozin, so that's always dangerous. She's also, Claressa, going to fight outside the United States as a professional for the first time. Her amateur career, of course, she spent fighting all over the world in international competitions, but it's not the same thing in the pros, so she's got to deal with the pressure of what's next. Probably Marshall will be sitting ringside watching, fighting another woman who is undefeated and doing so in a hostile environment. So she's got a lot to deal with, and it's going to be interesting, I think.
Andreas, let's turn to you. We haven't seen Claressa compete in boxing since March. She's obviously gone on to fight in MMA. She's coming off her first professional loss in combat sports, obviously going 1-1 in that time in the PFL. Since that, do you anticipate, a little ring rust out of the Claressa or anything a little different out of her that we normally wouldn't see prior to her competing in mixed martial arts?
That's actually the most intriguing thing to me is, like, Claressa's been training MMA, and obviously it's a completely different discipline, and she has to come back to boxing and training boxing, and now you're not defending takedowns anymore or leg kicks or clinching against the cage. You're going back to what you know. And for Claressa, I think she'll just slide right back at home, because I don't think she is dealing with an opponent that's too much of a threat. She may be a little, I don't want to say rusty, but it might take a second for her to get her timing back down just for a couple of rounds. But I expect the same old Claressa Shields. And just like Dan said, I echo everything he said. It's really about the next fight. And more importantly, now that they've announced Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor, you want to make sure you're front of mind for everybody, because I think a lot of people forget that she is the GOAT. She's a self-proclaimed GOAT. But now Serrano and Katie Taylor are fighting, and that's the big women's fight. You got to remind them that you're the best that there is. You got to remind them that you're a two-division undisputed champion. You got to remind them how good you are. And I think she needs to do that. But I'd like to see how she adjusts, because she's been working so hard at MMA, and she's got to bring it all back.
All right, Corinne, we're going to you. Ema Kozin, she's obviously 23 years young, southpaw fighter. Also her first time competing in the UK. She's got more boxing matches than Claressa, but obviously we can talk about strength of schedule, strength of opponents. Do you give her a shot, or how do you see this going out? Corinne, what's your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think actually we're going to see one of the best versions of Claressa Shields that we've seen in a long time. And I'll tell you why. She fought last time in March in boxing. We know that. Since then, she challenged herself and went to MMA. I actually give her a lot of credit for doing so. Yes, she went 1-1 in MMA, but when you're learning a brand new discipline and you beat a professional fighter at that discipline, I think it's okay to have one win and have one loss. And if you look at the frequency of which she's fighting, I mean, this is still within 1 year, right? This fight is going to be in February. Her last fight was in March. That's more often than other fighters like Gary Russell Jr. and so many others that we could name. So it's not like she's been inactive for a long period of time, like the way like a Keith Thurman has, who I'm sure we're going to talk about later in this show. So I think we're going to see a very motivated Claressa Shields. I give her credit for taking MMA seriously, training in Jackson Wink with all these great fighters. She's also now taking this boxing training extremely seriously. We're seeing her in the gym with Floyd Mayweather. I mean, you really can't get a better person in your ear than Floyd Mayweather. So I expect to see a massive showing for Claressa Shields. I don't think Kozin's going to be that much of a threat. If you look at her last opponent, her record was 2-7. Now we know that, obviously that she has a record of beating opponents, but the opposition isn't necessarily at the level that Claressa Shields has fought. So I look to see Claressa Shields with a great performance. The only other thing, though, I do think that the location does matter. Kozin from Slovenia. This fight is in the UK. Claressa Shields making that trip over the pond, things are going to be different, right? The time zone is different. The place you're staying is different. Everything is going to be different. So it's going to be interesting to see her adjust, but I do think this is part of the process for a fighter who wants to be great, who wants to be global, have global appeal. And obviously Claressa Shields has that and is on the way to building that even further.
And you brought up a great point. She's been training here in Las Vegas under Floyd Mayweather, amongst others, getting that elevation training in. She's taking it seriously. That fight's going to begin at 3 p.m. Eastern time right here. Check it out on the FITE TV app or online stream it. You don't want to miss it. But ladies and gentlemen, that's also just the co-main. We have to talk about the main event as well of that fight. We cannot lose sight of that. Chris Eubanks Jr. against Liam Williams. It's a middleweight fight. It's going to be a banger. Both guys like to throw hands. Let's go back to you, Corinne. We're going to go back and reverse snake. What are you most intrigued about in that middleweight clash?
Absolutely. I'm definitely excited for Eubank Jr. versus Liam Williams. Eubank Jr. is on a 5-fight winning streak. He's trending in the right direction. That's something we always like to see. He's only 32 years old. Liam Williams on the other side of the coin, 29 years old. So these are young guys in their prime, right? This is what we want, guys in their prime who are hungry. They call him the machine. Williams lost to Demetrius Andrade, who's skilled. He knocked him down and he lost more rounds, but that could be a learning experience. I've always said for fighters, when they take a loss, that could be a good thing because it can help shape their training, help shape their preparation, make them think about, ways to better themselves. So we don't like inactivity. We want to see this fight, and there's a lot of bad blood in this one. So I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Andreas, let's go back real quick to Claressa Shields. There's no chance that she's looking ahead at Savannah Marshall too soon, right? And if she does beat Savannah Marshall, where do you put her all time in the legacy of female fighters?
I mean, she's got to be up there, right? I mean, I really am concerned, I'm not even concerned, curious how Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor plays out, because I think that's going to have a lot to do with the future of women's boxing as well. But if Claressa Shields beats Savannah Marshall, which I think she will, because she's a completely different fighter since that loss in the amateurs, she's just gotten better. In the pantheon of great female fighters, she's got to be, top 3? Easy? I mean, we don't know how she's going to close her career. It's really difficult a lot of times to place fighters who are still active on the all-time greats. Even as, like we talk about Canelo all the time, his career is not over yet. It really matters of when you finish up. If Roy Jones retired after he beat John Ruiz, we'd have a different conversation about Roy Jones Jr., but that's not how things work out. But Claressa is making it, she stakes her claim if she beats Savannah Marshall, and we have to put her in the conversation, but we got to see how that career ends.
And Dan, we're going to kick it right back to you. Do you think there's any chance that Claressa is looking too far ahead at Savannah Marshall? Or do you think that she gets through this fight, she fights Savannah Marshall, and tell us where you put her in the all-time, amongst the all-time greats?
Schmo, I wouldn't say she's looking past Kozin to Marshall, but she knows that's the deal. I mean, they have a deal in principle already for the fight. That's why she's fighting on a boxer card in the UK. It wasn't like she's just going there to do a one-off and hoping she can make the match with Savannah. The whole point of it was they have contracts where, we're going to introduce you to the British audience, which is this fight. And then after that, in the next match, she's going to be fighting Savannah Marshall if she wins. And so I wouldn't say she's looking past her. Maybe I've heard other boxers say this when they have a bigger fight on the line after an important fight in front of them. They're not looking past that first fight. They're sort of looking through that fight. So she knows what's at stake, and this is not her first rodeo. She's been an undisputed champion now in 2 different weight classes. She's been a unified champion in 3 different weight classes. So she's a pro. She may not have that many pro fights, but she's an experienced veteran professional. And if you ever sit down and talk to her about it, she understands it. And if there's one thing that can motivate her, because when you're undefeated and you're winning all these titles, you're starting to make more and more money, and you've basically won every one of your professional fights without really too much trouble, in the sense that you're not even losing more than just a couple of rounds, and also winning handily. There needs to be some element of motivation. If there's anything that motivates Claressa Shields, it's to get that one loss back against Savannah Marshall, and she can't do that without taking care of her business against Kozin. So I think that she's not looking past her. She's looking through her and anticipating that fight, but knows there's work to be done first.
Andreas, when the Schmo was looking at the matchups and looking at the betting odds, Eubank is a minus 275 against Williams in this middleweight fight. Do you agree with the bettors on those side of things?
I do. I think, Curran alluded to it. There is bad blood between these two, and I think Eubank has a lot to prove. Yes, Liam Williams is coming off a loss. I don't know if it's going to be a teaching moment or if it's an ego-crushing loss, because Demetrius Andrade pretty much dominated that fight. And Williams, yes, he's going to try to get it back, but he's going up against an opponent who wants to take his head off. Demetrius Andrade just boxed his ears off. So I kind of look at this fight with Eubank as trying to finish the job early. If he can't do it, I'm curious where this fight goes, but I think the betting line is right on point here. I don't see Liam Williams as a tremendous threat to Eubank. I think it'll be a fun fight, but I think Eubank will come out victorious. So a minus 270, that's along the lines where I see it at.
And Dan, how do you feel about those betting line sentiments?
I mean, I think Eubank deserves to be the favorite. I don't think there's any question about that. And I tend to agree with what Andreas said, which is that it could be a fun fight, but I do think that in the end result that we'll be seeing Eubank win fairly dominating, fairly handily. I wouldn't say, he's not known for having, tremendous knockout power and knocking everybody out in the first or second round. So and Liam Williams is a game fighter and he's got a heart and all. So I do think it goes some rounds. But I think in the end, it's a Chris Eubank big victory, and he'll move on and look to other bigger business down the road, because he's going to have opportunities. When titles splinter and become vacant, he'll be there. In the front of the line, probably for one of those belts. Super middleweight is all now Canelo Alvarez, as he's the undisputed champion. I don't think anybody expects he's going to hold all 4 titles for a long, long period of time. Not because he's going to duck guys or is afraid to fight a guy, but the politics of the sport it works against guys keeping all the belts together for any extended period of time. So at some point when they become vacant, Chris Eubank with a win over Williams is going to be right there to fight for one of those titles, and he knows that, and that's one of the motivations in this fight for him. And Liam Williams also, by the way, if he should score the upset, he put up a good effort and not necessarily a winning effort against Demetrius Andrade, but he didn't embarrass himself by any stretch of the imagination. And so with a win against Chris Eubank, he's going to put himself in a great position to potentially fight for one of the titles when it becomes vacant. So there's a lot on the line for both guys. It's the personal pride, it's the bad blood factor, and it's the idea that they know that a victory puts them in a good stead for a possible title fight, even though this is not like an official eliminator. I call it a de facto eliminator.
There you have it, folks. We cannot wait for this fight card over in the UK. It's going to be 3 p.m. Eastern, February 5th. But as fight fans, we're blessed. We have another stacked card that's going to be coming at you later on at 9 p.m. Eastern. Premier Boxing Championships is putting on a great event here at the Michelob Ultra Arena. You can check it out here, FITE TV. Download the app, or you can get it streaming. We're going to have Keith one-time Thurman making his return over a 2-year layoff against Mario Barrios, the former super lightweight champion, going against Keith one-time Thurman, the former unified welterweight champion. 12 rounds at welterweight. Cannot wait for this, gentlemen. Let's start with Curran, the Schmo. You got to apologize. We're always getting it wrong because we're always speaking fast. Curran, how about that? what do you make of this matchup? What's most intriguing to you, of Barrios going up in weight or the long layoff for Keith one-time Thurman?
Yeah, there's a lot of tremendous storylines in this fight. Keith Thurman, I think there's a lot left for him. He's a former champion. He was undefeated for a long period of time in the welterweight division. He has a win over Sean Porter, and I think that's a big deal. I think that's aged well over time. He ran into the legend Manny Pacquiao, who at 40 years old dominated Keith Thurman, but Thurman was in that fight. Yes, he did get knocked down. If you look at one of the scorecards, Thurman actually won one of the scorecards. I'm not saying he necessarily deserved that, but that speaks to the fact that it was a close fight. The issue, though, is it's been 2.5 years since we've seen him in the ring. And what is that going to do to him when he gets back in there, right? That's the question. We're going to learn a lot about who Keith Thurman is when he steps back in there, what he has left, and his goals and his ambitions in the welterweight division, and if he can achieve those, or any division above that as well, because obviously we know he has a lot of ambitions in boxing. You look at Mario Barrios. He's a game competitor. He lost to Tank Davis. No shame in that. That can happen. Here's the thing. You don't want to be a guy that takes back-to-back losses, right? You don't want to be the guy that is now, has those 2 L's on his record, and now it's kind of back to that rebuilding phase. So I see two very motivated men versus motivated man, and there's a battle of inactivity versus activity. I think there's a lot of storylines, and I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Curran brings up a great point. Andreas, which of these two men has more to lose February 5th, Saturday evening?
Keith Thurman. And the reason why is because, Curran alluded to this, but Keith hasn't looked terribly spectacular over his past 5 or so fights. You can argue that he lost to Sean Porter. There's a chance he could have lost to Danny Garcia. He got hurt by Josecito Lopez. And he came out and fought Manny Pacquiao, and you could clearly tell his timing was off. It took him a while to adjust. He hasn't looked like one time. He might as well remove that nickname because we haven't seen one time in many years. But this was a guy who was the king of the welterweight division. People were clamoring for him to fight Errol Spence Jr. That's some distant memory unless he can win this fight and get back on track. He has everything to lose because he once had the welterweight division in the palm of his hand, and now he's watched it slip away due to injuries and inactivity and some performances that were solid, but they were not spectacular and not indicative of the man that we called one time. As for Mario Barrios, he's moving up in weight. You can blame it on that. He came off the loss to Gervonta Davis. You could blame that knockout loss on him maybe not looking great against Keith Thurman. It's kind of a cherry on top. If Mario Barrios were to come out and even have a decent performance, he's an opponent. But Keith Thurman is not here to be anybody's opponent. He has to win this fight.
And Dan, we're going to kick it over to you. What are you most intrigued about in this matchup between these two?
I want to see how Keith Thurman looks after 2.5 years off. It's really that simple. This fight, on paper, I think it lends itself to being an exciting fight, but it really is about Keith Thurman. No offense to Mario Barrios. Mario Barrios is the B-side. He's the opponent. He's the guy coming off not just a loss, but a devastating knockout loss to a smaller man. This is to see what does Keith Thurman have left in the tank. This is an opportunity to have to take off that rust, set himself up for some very mega fights down the road if he chooses to keep on doing his thing. It's like Andre said, if Barrios pulls the upset, it's just a big cherry on the top. But Barrios, he's an entertaining fighter. He's a hungry guy, but he's not at the same level as Keith Thurman, in my opinion. I thought he lost to Akhmadov. Then he came back and he won against Ryan Carl, which is, just a regular kind of opponent. Then he got absolutely drilled by Gervonta Davis. So he's got some proving to do. If he wins, great win for him, obviously. But this is about Keith Thurman. So I'm intrigued by what does Keith Thurman look like? What's he look like he's got left in the tank? And what other big mega fights are out there for him should he dispatch Mario Barrios like I expect that he will do?
In 2019, Mikey Garcia moved up to welterweight to fight Errol Spence Jr. Why won't this be similar to that? Or do you anticipate this being kind of a similar situation to that?
I don't think it's a similar situation because Mikey Garcia is a much, much, much better fighter than Barrios. I think it's pretty much that simple. Mikey Garcia was an outstanding fighter in the smaller weight classes, wanted to challenge himself at the higher weights, had his own lengthy layoff issues that he dealt with earlier in his career. And, it's just a different level of fighter, in my opinion. Errol Spence, when he fought Mikey, was at the top of his game. That was a great performance from Spence. Even though he didn't get the knockout, he won basically every single second of every round. They drew a big, big crowd. AT&T Stadium put on, a very big fight. It was a historical opportunity for Mikey to move up and win yet another world title. But again, to compare Barrios to Mikey Garcia, I don't think is fair, just because even though Mikey is coming off a loss now at this point, having been upset by Sandor Martin during the summer, the fact is he's just a better fighter than Barrios. Barrios does not really have a big victory on his record in my mind because, like I said, the Akhmedov fight I thought was kind of a gift.
All right, gentlemen, I want to open it up to this because the Schmo's getting a sense that we like Claressa Shields and we like Keith one-time Thurman. But if those two match up, who's has a better chance of getting upset in those two? Let's bring that whole thing full circle. Curran, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think in terms of who could possibly be upset, it would have to be Keith Thurman, because we just don't know what he's going to bring to the ring with 2.5 years of being away from it. So I would say he's more likely to be upset. Now, in terms of real quick about the situation of Barrios moving up, I think it's very different than Mikey Garcia, because Mikey Garcia moved up 2 different weight classes. Barrios is moving up 1 here. And the other part of it, too, I think, is that Errol Spence, no offense to Keith Thurman, is not Keith Thurman, or I should say Keith Thurman is not Errol Spence. So I think that's a different animal there. But to answer your question, I think Thurman has a better chance of getting upset.
Andreas, how do you see that? Who's got a better chance of getting upset between the two?
Oh, it's definitely Keith Thurman. I don't think Claressa Shields, there's not a shot in hell she's going to lose this fight unless she falls asleep at the wheel for 10 rounds. I don't see that happening. Keith has a lot more to deal with. And Mario Barrios, he should have been a welterweight. He was really squeezing himself down to 140. So you look at him and he's going to about have a 3-inch height advantage. There's a path to victory that presents itself. If Keith's inactivity really takes a toll on him, if he starts off slow, he could lose this fight. Claressa, I don't see that happening, but Keith definitely is a lot more vulnerable than Claressa Shields. I can't see a world where Claressa is going to lose this fight.
And Dan, the Schmo sensing a clean sweep amongst the panel here. You agree with those sentiments?
The Schmo would be correct. It is a clean sweep. I think that both of the favorites win. I think Claressa wins. I think Keith wins. But I think if I had to pick who has the chance to be upset, of course it would be Keith Thurman, because Barrios is a hungry guy. He's a game guy. He comes forward. He's not afraid to get hit, but he also has pretty decent power. We don't know how that power is going to translate into the welterweight division, and Keith has always shown a good chin. But when you're coming off that kind of long layoff and the timing's not there, you never know if you're just going to get clipped in the right spot at the right moment. So again, while I expect both of the favorites to prevail, certainly Thurman's in more danger, I think, than Claressa is.
Now the Schmo's excited for this fight. I'm sure you're all excited for this fight. Let's tell the world why they should be excited for this fight. Its super featherweight matchup is going to be 4 division champion Leo Santa Cruz against Keenan Carbajal. The Schmo cannot wait for this banger of a fight. Let's start with you, Andreas. Of this fight, why should the fans tune in, and why is this must-see TV?
I mean, Leo Santa Cruz at one time was must-see TV because he threw a billion punches around, and now we got to see what he's got left. He got smoked by Gervonta Davis in a manner that could just change your entire life and outlook on fights. I don't want to see a gun-shy Leo Santa Cruz. I want to see the old Leo Santa Cruz, but does it still exist? And he's facing an opponent, let's be honest, that doesn't really have much of a shot to beat him unless Leo Santa Cruz is shot. So I'm very concerned about what Leo has to offer. But if he comes back as any semblance of the old Leo Santa Cruz, this should be a fun fight, and we should get a lot of punches and a lot of offense.
But Dan, is there any chance we're going to get to see the old Leo Santa Cruz?
Well, once a fighter gets to that level, you're always aging. He hasn't fought for a while. It's like Andreas said, the last fight he had against Davis was a really brutal, really bad. It's not just a stoppage loss or he got stopped on a cut or the corner stopped it. He got knocked out cold, separated from his senses in a very dramatic and brutal way. And it was kind of disheartening to see that, because you never want to see that happen to any of these guys. But I've known Leo Santa Cruz for like his entire professional career. You want to talk about a sweet guy, a nice guy outside the ring, not like the killer he is inside the ring. That's a guy that's like a beautiful kid. You don't want to see him get hurt at all. And to watch him just get laid out like that was, almost brings like, a lump in your throat. What's he got left? He sounds like he's into it, like he's taken the proper time to get himself together mentally and physically since that knockout. They're not putting him in with a super top-notch opponent in Carbajal, a guy that he can handle. Remember, Leo also still holds a world title as a featherweight. When he fought against Gervonta Davis, also holding a title at 130. He lost, but he's now, if everything is successful for him in this fight, with Carbajal, the idea is take this non-title 10-rounder, and if you win and everything is good, you then make your way back and continue to defend your title at featherweight. So there's a lot on the line. He's still a world champion, but he's got to show that he's not damaged from that knockout to Gervonta Davis. He's being matched appropriately in this fight. And it's a chance for fans to see one of the most fan-friendly and entertaining fighters we've seen in a long time back in the ring doing his thing in a fight that could be fun for a few rounds, and then move on and hope to have a continuous successful title run in the featherweight division.
And Curran, I want to wrap this up with you. Of all the matches on the undercard, which are you most looking forward to viewing?
Absolutely. It's actually a pretty good undercard. There's a lot of names that we've seen before. We talked about Leo Santa Cruz. I mean, he's got the fan-friendly style. He throws a lot of punches. He comes forward, and it's be interesting to see how he comes back from a knockout from Tank Davis, right? That seems to be the theme here. There's also other fighters that we've heard of, Jose Cito Lopez, Luis Neri. One fighter that I actually think I'm interested in seeing his career development, and he's way down there on the undercard, but that's Fernando Vargas Jr. That's the son of Fernando Vargas. He's 4-0 with 4 knockouts. I've covered a few of his fights. He's looking to go to 5-0. I think he's got a bright future. So I'm actually intrigued to see his fight and just see his development, but definitely a good undercard for this one.
And that will take place at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A loaded day for you fight fans, February 5th. Tune in on FITE TV. You don't want to miss it. For Dan Rafael, for Corinne, for Andreas, I'm the Schmo. We're wrapping up Fight and Focus, and we will see you next time.